Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Comprehension Strategies workshop. My name is Cynthia. Oh, having a little problem here. 1 second, everyone. Let me stop sharing this for a second. And welcome again to today's presentation. We are talking, as we mentioned, about comprehension. This may be something that many of us struggle with, right? If we're students and we really don't know how to go about this material, then it might be it might feel a lot more challenging, right, than your average student. Maybe I always share. Here we go. I'm resharing again. I always share how when I first went into nursing school, I thought that this was going to be something really easy, which was a big mistake on my part. And then later on, I learned that this, nursing school is actually a very, very strenuous thing, right? On the brain, on your eyeballs, on your just everything. It's just a lot, right? And I had no idea how to go about actually understanding the information. Maybe your average person can read something and get it automatically, and that might vary from person to person, but for nursing school, for me, it wasn't that easy. It wasn't as automatic. I think maybe a piece of it has something to do with me not being the best student in high school, so those bad habits kind of carried over when I was in nursing school. In that first semester, I barely made it by the skin of my teeth, as they say. So we are going to talk about how to go about these challenging either subjects, majors. Maybe you're in a class and you hate the class and you don't understand it and you don't even know how to ask the questions or what questions you should be asking. That is what today's workshop is for. Okay, we will be using a few documents and you'll find them at irisreading.com/comp. I'll also share them on my side as well. If you maybe can't read it off of my screen, then you're more than welcome to drop that link in a separate tab in your browser, and you can maximize the screen there. I had a little bit of a rough start this morning, but my name again is Cynthia, and I am one of the instructors with Iris Reading, and we are based out of Chicago. So if you have ever heard of us in the past, or maybe you've never heard of us, I'd like to know. Let us know in the chat if you've heard of us. We're actually known for our speed reading workshop. That workshop, we've taught it in over 100 cities around the world, in many languages as well. So I know we've taught that workshop in Spanish. I believe we have an Arabic speaking instructor, a French speaking instructor, at one point a German speaking instructor. So we've taught these workshops. We've been out there in the world for a hot second. And so if you've never taken our speed reading workshop or any of the ones that we offer here at Iris Reading, then we encourage you to check out our website, irisreading.com. Today's comprehension workshop just launched in March of this year. And so we've seen very, very good reviews so far on it. We want to continue, to put this information out there. And if any students are actually struggling to better, to comprehend, then we hope you find this of benefit. As we mentioned, the link that we'll use for our documents today, you can find it at irisreading.com/comp. Again, you don't have to, but in case you can't see what I am showing you on my screen when we get to the reading portion of the presentation, then you can just pop that up in your browser. We are also on social media, and so if you enjoy the presentation, you like what we do here, then please check us out. Obviously, we are on YouTube. We have an Instagram account with the same handle, iris.reading. We're on TikTok at iris.reading, and we have our official business page, Iris Reading, as well as a book club. And so that book club is called Book Lovers Assemble, where we discuss all things related to reading, things as silly as what do you constitute as an appropriate bookmark, right? Or what are some things that you've seen people do with books that annoys you? So if you want to join the conversation, if you want to get in there get on there and rant about a book that you've read that you absolutely loved or maybe absolutely hated, we'd love for you to do it on our page. And again, that is at Book Lovers Assemble. Okay, our Instagram, we have been playing around with like random trivia, random fact. If you want to impress your friends with random things that you feel your average person doesn't know, or maybe your group of friends doesn't know, then go ahead and check out that Instagram. We are doing about 1 or 2 of those posts a day. And our TikTok, we go on little adventures around the community, around Illinois, sometimes if we travel out of state, with different learning related subjects. So this past weekend was Memorial Day weekend, and we actually found a very small town in Illinois called Huntley, and we attended their Memorial Day parade. And it, you know, for a small town of, I think it's less than 20,000 people that live in that town, they put on a tremendous Memorial Day parade. So if you want to see a little piece of that, you can check it out on our TikTok at irisreading.com. Okay, so let's get into comprehension, the meat of our sandwich today. What questions should we be asking when we are learning something? Okay, and these are 6 generic questions that can help guide you to deepen your comprehension. So whether you are an art major or a drama major or a music major, whatever major, and you're reading something and it's just not making sense, then these questions you can use. Now, we are playing around with maybe creating like a downloadable worksheet, or maybe like a sticky note or a bookmark, something that you can just have on hand as you're reading and fill out the answers to these 6 questions. So first thing is, we want you to be able to explain what you are learning, okay? If you can't, then we need to stop everything and try to figure out why we can't explain it. All right, if we didn't understand it, do we need to reread? What do we need to do so that we are successful at explaining this? Whether we're explaining it to our professor, back to our professor, maybe we're explaining it to a classmate, maybe we're explaining it to someone at home who has never taken this type of class. Whatever the reasons, or whoever it is that you're explaining it to, we want them to ask you questions. Okay, so this is why it's good to mostly explain it to people who have never heard of this, because what will happen is they will poke holes in what you think you knew really well. So they'll ask you questions, and if you can't answer those questions, that means you gotta run back to the book and research and find out what the answers to these questions are. Okay, so another thing is that most people actually stop trying to deepen that comprehension once they're able to explain it. And that's not the only dimension we want you to tap into when trying to deepen your understanding again. So first dimension, I call them dimensions. You'll notice in a moment why, is explaining it. Second, we want you to find the different perspectives of this subject. So, you know, you'd be surprised how many opposing views you can find on subjects nowadays, and you shouldn't have a hard time finding maybe someone who hates the book you're reading, or someone who disagrees with the author that wrote that book, right? Maybe someone who opposes the subject and they call it a fake subject or bad information. It's good to look at why people think this way. It doesn't mean we're going to convert, but it helps us see, you know, why they think that way and how we can defend what we know against what they think they know. All right, so that is our different dimensions. We want you to also tap into your self-knowledge. So this is, we're making our learning personal at this point, and we want you to tie everything back to your day-to-day life. Try to find a connection between how you live your life and what this subject has to do with you on a daily basis. Okay, we want you to tap into your feelings as well. So can you empathize with this subject? Okay, and you may be thinking, I can never empathize with math. Well, you know, we want you to try to empathize at some point with whatever subject you're learning. Okay, what is that? There's a quote that says, like, people forget what you said, but they never forget how you made them feel, right? So we maybe, if we're able to tap into those emotions, you know, it'll have a lasting effect in our memory. Hello, Terrence. I see you're joining us from North Carolina. Welcome, welcome. We're not too close. As we mentioned, we are broadcasting from the Chicagoland area. Thank you for sharing. Next dimension, how can this be applied practically? So practical application, okay? How is this going to affect you when you are in the workforce, for example, or when you are officially working as an engineer or as a nurse or as a doctor? How will you be able to use this in a practical way? And this is really important when we are learning those subjects, again, that we do not like. For example, I said algebra earlier because I hated math when I was in high school. I absolutely hated it. And I thought to myself, I will never, ever, ever have to use algebra ever again, right? That seems to be the reasoning of most students when there's a subject you don't like. Well, when am I ever going to have to use this in the real world, right? Which is a bad way of thinking, because I actually ran into a lot of algebra when I was in nursing school. There's a whole module dedicated to math, and not only mathematics, but being able to do this math quickly with no calculator, and sometimes with no pen and paper as well, right? So, I mean, imagine having a nurse that has to give you a life-saving injection, but they pull out their calculator and their notebook, and it's taking them forever to calculate how much they can give you safely. Nobody wants a nurse that's going to take 7 minutes to figure something out, right? So this is a very intense section in nursing school. It's called pharmacology. And if I had only thought about how algebra ties into this, maybe I would have done a little bit better, picked it up a little bit faster. However, the point is, let's learn by example and not do what I did, okay? So try to find some practical application. Really think as to how this can help you in the future. And your final dimension, we want to think about the interpretation of other individuals. So if maybe you speak another language and you have access to the same material, but in that other language, so it's translated, you know, a lot of times things can and will be lost in translation, right? For example, I'm not sure if it's the second most spoken language in the world, but actually, it's not. I'm thinking about Chicago. But Spanish, if you just take something that you read in Spanish and it's translated into English, sometimes the meaning is no longer there, right? Especially if you're a native speaker of the Spanish language. Yeah, I hate math. Well, I still hate math too, Terrence. Who am I kidding? I don't like it either. I just kind of had to learn to live with it. I think as most of us have had to. The meaning is lost when things are interpreted. So maybe comparing two different versions of the same piece that you're reading, whether Spanish English, Arabic English, French English, whatever. Or maybe we're thinking about artistic representation, dance, right? Music. Things are interpreted in different ways. So you can also go about it that way as well. Okay, so before we work at actually acquiring these 6 dimensions and using them effectively, we want to see what your current comprehension toolbox has and if all your tools are working well, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to read something. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to read it. Now, if you don't want to read it off of my screen because it's maybe too small or a little blurry, not a problem. Again, you can go to irisreading.com/comp and look up the article that is called Focus Rituals.pdf. Okay. Now, you'll notice there's a timer going off in the middle of the screen here. I just want you to read normally, and I will come back on, so I will disable my webcam while you're reading. I don't want to distract anybody. So I'll come back at the end of the 2 minutes, and I will ask you to give me a percentage of how much you feel you understood from the article, whether that be 30, 40, 50, 90%, okay? So here we go. I will disable my webcam. We'll read for 2 minutes. You'll notice the timer ticking away in the middle of the screen here. And let's see. This is also true for different cultures. There's a lot of history and cultural beliefs that affect how we perceive various words. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. What was it? So there is, this reminds me, there is a section in nursing school where you do learn about different cultures and different religious beliefs, right? And how working as a nurse, maybe for someone of the Jewish faith, you have to be mindful of certain things. So there was an area dedicated to people of Latin descent, right, or Hispanics. And I just remember going home and telling my parents, I was like, hey, there's a whole section here dedicated to how to better cater to the needs of a Spanish-speaking client, or a client, a patient that is of, you know, Mexican descent, Puerto Rican descent. And I remember my parents were like, ugh, they were just like annoyed by the subject. And I'm like, this is a good thing. What are you talking about? But yeah, like you say, it just like a clash in culture. Just the understanding of it. They were like, everybody knows how to, you know. It was just something that I thought was funny. But yeah, to your point, Terrence, this is 100% true. So what we're going to do is read now for 2 minutes normally. We'll come back, and if you want to share how much of the article you feel you understood, you comprehended, whether that be 60, 70, 20%, we'll talk about that. Okay, here we go. Disabling my mic. Let's start reading. Focus rituals, 2 minutes. 3, 2, 1, go. All right, very good. So we read for 2 minutes. If you want to give me like an overall percentage of how you feel you did with this article, whether that's 60, 70%, again, no worries. You don't have to share this if you don't want to, but we do want to just use that percentage to share something else that we feel very strongly about here at Iris Reading. And if you are thinking maybe comprehension, maybe some of us roll our eyes because we think about standardized testing, right? Preparing for the SAT, ACT, right? The NCLEX, the MCAT, the GRE. There's a lot of exams that are timed and a lot of reading with usually questions that follow, whether that be multiple choice, fill in the blank, essay question, right? All of that. Now, the problem we have with the standardized reading tests is that, for example, if you have to keep in mind, for one, these are timed, right? So if you're maybe taking an exam and you're a little bit slower at test taking, at reading, at comprehending, let's say you only answer 19 of the 38 questions, it's all you have time for, you would get a 50%, right? And that, as we know, is a big fat F, right? But is it fair? Because if you think about it, let's say those 19 questions you answered, they were all right. You just didn't get to answering the other half. Would it, that's one of the problems that we have with that standardized reading exams, again, is that they don't really measure really what your comprehension is, because some of us, just at the thought of having a timer, we start to shake, it gets in our head, and we're already, it's like setting us up to fail, right? So we want to improve that comprehension. Unfortunately, we cannot change standardized testing, but we can help you, for one, be a little bit better at test taking, faster at reading, and hopefully faster at comprehending after today's workshop. So again, if you want to give us a percentage, you're more than welcome to do so. Now, let's start with a subject that I think most of us are fairly familiar with. We probably learned about this in like 4th grade, I would think. And if I was to ask you, which I will, what you think your overall understanding is on this subject, maybe most of us would say, oh, well, I get it. I mean, I get it. Well, here we go. I'm about to ask. So you want to let me know what your overall comprehension is with the subject of gravity, right? Gravity is something, let's see. Terrence, I comprehended most of the article. I believe that my personal experience really helped me connect and ground the concepts and ideas being presented. For instance, meditation has been a practice. So it looks like you're using some of these comprehension strategies that we're about to talk about, Terrence. You are ahead of the game here. Thank you for sharing. Let's take a subject that most of us are familiar with, which is gravity. And you'd think, I get it pretty well. So that's good, right? If we all agree that we understand it, let's see, Terrence would say, I comprehended about 95%. Great, very good. So if you do understand this subject of gravity and you feel like you get it pretty well, then you should then be able to explain to me what the theory of relativity has to do with gravity. How does it all tie in together? Can you? Can you explain to me how quantum physics ties into gravity as well? Or even something maybe that's just a little simpler, which is distance, and how that ties into gravity. You see, because if we're making the claim that we do understand this subject well, we should be able to answer questions coming from all directions, right? So now when I ask you, what do you think about gravity? Do you feel like you have a good understanding on it still? Well, let's get into the first dimension, okay? Because ideally, if we're going through these 6 steps, we will have a better understanding. Now, keep in mind, we will ask a lot of questions throughout the presentation, and we're going to kind of categorize those as hypotheticals. The reason being that the point of the workshop, again, is to help you deepen your comprehension. Now, we do that by means of asking questions, and we do that by really tapping into the not so much touched in areas of our brains, right? So maybe we're asking questions that you've never thought about, and we're not going to answer the questions because hopefully your interest is piqued to the point where you go and you research the answers to some of these questions, okay? 30%. Oh, thank you, Terrence. Okay, very good. So can you explain it, right? This is the first thing we said. Can you explain what you're learning? Whether we're talking about gravity, whether we're talking about whatever you're learning. Can you explain it to me? Can you explain it to a classmate, a colleague, your mom, whoever, right? Can you explain it in another language if you speak another language, right? The purpose of this is to get people to ask you questions, all the questions. And maybe when we think of questions, we get a little scared, right? We're like, what kind of questions are they going to ask us? We're not talking about anything philosophical, right? We're just thinking of something as simple as asking why, right? Why does this happen with gravity? Why do things fall when you throw them up in the air? Why don't they float up into the atmosphere? Why don't they go up there, right? Some things that can help us with this If you've ever thought about maybe a subject and you're just like, man, I wish someone would explain this to me like if I was 5 years old. There's actually, if you go on Reddit, there's ELI5, explain like I'm 5. Okay, so there's a bunch of questions on there that people have asked. And you see there's a lot of collaborating with these. So some have 23, 29, 20, 195 comments. So people will ask a question. I like this one. Where is it? How does gravity affect time? Dumb it down for me as much as possible, right? I feel that way sometimes. And I think, I'm not sure if I shared, but I'm also a student. So I'm going after a PhD in educational psychology. And right now we're doing a lot of reading on neurology. And some of the things I'm just like, oh God, I need someone to break this down to its most simplest terms. And Reddit has really helped a lot. When I clicked on this one, this how does gravity affect time, dumb it down for me as much as possible, this was the answer we got. And there's a few answers here. We won't read through them, but they do help. And it's nice to have, again, other individuals, maybe from a different maybe they work, in NASA, for example, or they work with something related to research. So they're able to explain things a little easier for us. So in order for you to explain it, maybe you have to get on here. Maybe you have to get on Reddit and see some of the explanations of other individuals. But it doesn't have to be on here. You can ask your classmates to explain it to you as well. Somebody might get something that you don't. Right? We also like to use ChatGPT, which is very popular now. And what I did is I just asked ChatGPT, can you explain gravity in simplest terms? And it did that, right? It did that. And the nice thing is that you can kind of create, you can turn ChatGPT into like your study buddy, right? And so ask questions or ask it to maybe make you a quiz, which is what I was able to do later on. I said, just give me like a 5-question quiz on the subject of gravity or whatever subject we're learning. And it's been really helpful. Terrence, there's also a YouTube channel called Wired. Yes, I think they're also on TikTok too, that breaks down complex concepts in 5 levels, starting with kids and then experts. Yes. I am a fan of that channel, actually. I think we are subscribed to them. They're great. And there's actually multiple channels on there. Like there's one that's a history buffs, and it'll take, historical things and break it down to explain why this happened. So again, keeping in harmony with the theme of explaining, these are some tools that you could use to help you better your explanation on the subject. And again, we don't really want you explaining it to the wind, because what happens is that when you're explaining it maybe to a wall or to the wind, you won't have people ask you questions. And also, it's very easy to fall in the trap of just regurgitating something that you read off the page, which is something that I think most of us have done in the past, right? I know I've done it, where I'm like, okay, let me explain this. And I pretty much say word for word what I just read. And that's not really understanding it, right? We want to give it our own twist, our own flavor. Again, this reminds me of Feynman's technique: explain it in simple terms, explain it in complex terms, right? You want to be able to do that as you are, again, deepening this comprehension and going through that first dimension, which is explaining. Okay, so with gravity, we talked about explaining it. Maybe some of us are like, well, I don't think I can explain that much anymore, right? Like I can tell you that the ball will fall or the apple will fall off the tree, but I can't necessarily explain to you why or how. Well, then we need to better our comprehension on the subject, right? Let's get into the second dimension, which is the different perspectives on this subject, okay? Now, you'd be surprised everything we found on Google when we're talking about gravity again. And this goes for many subjects. It's not just gravity, but you'd be surprised what you can find on there. So we were like, are there people that maybe don't agree with the subject of gravity? And I wasn't aware of this before this presentation, so this was actually a lot of fun to create. And I did actually find a group of people that don't believe in gravity, and they call themselves the Anti-Gravity Alliance. This is a real page. If you Google it, you'll find it. They say, how do birds, bats, and insects fly? How do airplanes fly? Why do balloons float up? What makes a hot air balloon keep from falling from the sky? How do zeppelins, or what is this, dirigibles, float in the sky? How does siphon work? How does a siphon work? So some questions, right? Maybe we've asked these questions, and if you think it's just them, it's not. They actually have a whole list of organizations that support them. One of them being, I saw here, Scientology.org. So just interesting, right? We're going down a rabbit hole now, trying to figure out why they believe what they believe, right? And if you think, okay, well, maybe it's just this group of people, well, we took a step back and went to the National Center for Science Education, and on the subject of gravity, they're saying it's only a theory. Okay, so when we think about what we know, like we know the ball will hit the ground. I know I keep saying that, but we know that will happen. So it must be gravity. So it must be a fact. But the National Center for Science Education is saying it's only a theory, but I know that will happen. So you see how there's a bit of a conflict here, right? Fact and theory, not necessarily the same thing, right? We're just going to keep climbing down this hole. We've got individuals that have submitted their dissertation for PhD. They're calling gravity a myth. And we even found an astrophysicist by the name of Dr. Brian Keating, who says he does not believe in gravity, right? So we found all this, and we could have probably found more as well, stating that gravity is not real, or it's not maybe what we thought it was. So maybe now you're thinking to yourself, right? Well, look into it, right? If you are a firm believer of gravity being fact and not theory, can you defend what you think you know really well against what they're claiming you don't know very well? Okay, and again, hopefully this kind of drives us to do a little more research on the subject. So that is the different perspectives on the subject. Now let's go into your self-knowledge. Okay, and despite what people say, it is actually all about you. Okay, especially when you're learning, seeing that you're going to take the exam. Yeah, it's all about you. Okay, so when we're learning whatever it is that we're learning, we want to tie it back to our function. Just look for some function and purpose. All right, day-to-day life. How does this affect you? Maybe you've used once upon a time eye drops, right? You know that when you're going to use these eye drops, you don't have to worry about the water floating up. You just have to worry about aiming correctly into your eyeball, right? But you know that the drop will roll down your face even if you miss your eye. You know that's going to happen. So this is something simple, okay? But we want you to take a moment to think about this with whatever subject you're learning, okay? Because again, trying to find that application, it's good. It deepens that understanding again, and you'll be a little more successful at actually understanding what you're learning. And this might be easier to do with some subjects and not so much with others. Maybe it'll take some time, a few days even, to figure out how this applies to you, how this affects you. Okay, but again, thinking about it, that's good. Okay, it's giving another dimension to what we claim to know really well. So that is that self-knowledge. Let's get into empathy. Okay, empathy. Now we want to empathize with our subject. Okay, and as we said, maybe we can empathize with math, seeing that there's two people here today, me and it looks like Terrence, that do not agree with math. We don't like it, but we're talking about gravity again. So how do we empathize with gravity? Well, maybe we can think about people that go sometime with less of a gravitational pull. So we're thinking about astronauts, right? And maybe we think about some things that we do here on Earth that, you know, astronauts might have a hard time doing, okay? And one of them we thought about was taking a shower, right? So we take showers down here on Earth, or baths, right? We don't have a problem with that unless you come from, like, for example, I come from Puerto Rico. It's where I grew up, and we, on my side of the island, on the non-tourist side, we don't have running water. So what, you know, what they've done on where my family lives on that farm is they actually they catch rainwater, and that's how we take a shower. So you know, it's fairly easy for your average person, maybe not on that side of Puerto Rico, but everywhere else, to just take the shower, right? And what about astronauts? How do they take a shower, right? Because they're floating around. So does that mean that the water floats around as well? How does one successfully take a shower up in space? Well, we found a great TikTok from an astronaut that actually shares how she washes her hair up in space. Now, I'm going to play the video. I don't think you'll be able to hear the audio, but I will walk you through what she's saying. So let's go ahead and watch this. So
let's see. To get started, these are the things I need.
So she has
a bag of warm water, a little no-rinse shampoo, towel, and my comb. What I like to do is start by just putting some hot water, squirting it onto my scalp.
So she'll squeeze it onto her scalp.
And I have a mirror here so I can kind of watch what I'm doing.
She's got a mirror velcroed to the wall.
Sometimes the water gets away from you.
And she's got to catch the water.
You try and catch as much as you can.
Wow.
And I just work the water up through to the end of my hair.
So she's working the water through her hair.
And I take my no-rinse shampoo and squirt it also on the scalp just a little bit and rub it in. Again, kind of working it out to the end. And sometimes I'll actually take my comb and work it all the way to the end. And I like to take my towel while I have the shampoo in there and just kind of work it. Because without standing under running water, you kind of need to use the towel a little bit to help get some of the dirt out.
Because it helps get the dirt out, she said. You rub it into
I like to follow that by a little more water.
Water again.
It's called no-rinse shampoo, but I think it's best to use a little water with it.
She said she'll use water even though it says no-rinse shampoo, because it works better. She's just combing it through now, as you can see.
It actually feels kind of squeaky clean right now.
That it feels squeaky clean.
I'll take the dry part of my towel. We use towels for quite a while here.
The dry part.
Since we have limited supplies.
And she's just.
We use them wisely.
Drying it.
I think that's pretty good. And now as my hair dries, as the water evaporates from my hair, it will become humidity in the air, and then our air conditioning system will collect that into condensate, and it won't be long in our water processing system.
So she said the water, I know you guys could see the subtitles, but wow, I'm every time and I've seen this video a bunch of times, and every time I'm like, you know, because just think about if you have like long, thick hair, how do you do that? You know what I'm saying? Like, if it's a struggle, oh my gosh, if it's a struggle to wash your hair down here on Earth with running water when you have that thick hair, I can only imagine how hard it is up in space. So yeah, I can definitely empathize. Maybe some people are like, it's not a big deal, but for me, every time I watch this, I'm just like, you know, blown away. And it makes me think about how I maybe sometimes take for granted my shower, seeing that she doesn't have one up in space. So, you know, my hat goes off to her. And this TikTok account, if you're looking for it, it's Lord_of_the_stars. So Lord of the Stars. Great TikTok channel. I follow it. I see these posts that they have. So maybe now we can empathize a little bit more with astronauts right? And that's just with taking a shower, but think about other things. For example, the Smithsonian has an article on what happens when you go to the bathroom up in space, and everything that's involved with the training of an astronaut, right? Or maybe think about something, you know, that's like automatic, a body function like burping. What happens when you're up in space and you burp? If you look up the answer, I'll only give you 2 key words. And what we found is called, it says something about how the gases in your intestines will form chunky bubbles. So yeah, think about that. Maybe Google it. Okay, so now we can maybe empathize a little bit more with astronauts, right? We took a little bit of a detour here, but you know, this is all in harmony with our theme of gravity, right? So maybe we have a better understanding now with the subject, a little bit more, right? A little bit of a detour, but it all works together in the end. And of course, they have less of a pull, which makes things a little more challenging up in space. Let's go on to the next dimension. We have 2 more before we wrap up. The next one is practical application. Okay. Again, this might be easier to do with certain subjects. For others, it will take a little more time. So with gravity, simple. We keep saying throw the ball, it's going to hit the ground. We don't have a problem with that. That's not hard to understand. But maybe for other subjects, we don't necessarily understand how we can apply them to the larger world. So we may want to step away from the textbook for a moment to try to find how this applies when it's time for your major, when it's time to take the state exam, when it's time for you to actually work as a doctor. How does this all tie in together? Okay. Keep that in mind. Again, with certain subjects, a little easier, with others, not so much. Okay, varies from subject to subject. And we'll go into our final dimension now, which is the interpretation by others. So how has gravity been interpreted by individuals? And we decided to go the artistic route here. So we found a bunch of gravity-defying sculptures, right? That they're in harmony with our theme. So I think we found like 4 or 5 of them around the world. Again, they're gravity defying, which means that this statue shouldn't stand up straight. It shouldn't, right? Because we know that gravity would force that big silver ball down, but it's upright. This is called The Force of Nature by Lorenzo Quinn. And so it's in Shanghai. Interesting, right? Because we know gravity, again, we're just like, your brain is like, I don't get it, right? Here's another one in the Fontainebleau, Paris. I don't know how much formaldehyde and crazy glue or gorilla glue or cement glue they're used to keep this upright, but right, gravity is supposed to push that thing over, right? We also found the floating rocks in Cairo, and we actually had a participant join us a couple of weeks ago who helped with the installation of these sculptures in Egypt. I think they're in Cairo, actually. So that's interesting. Again, I don't know how these floating rocks are actually staying upright. This doesn't seem right? You'd think that this is like something made by ChatGPT, right? But it just doesn't make sense. But this is a real sculpture. People have seen it. So again, with the gravity defying sculptures. And then our final one is this book sculpture we found in, I think these are in Madrid, Spain. So a lot of glue, I would imagine, to help keep these sculptures upright. So just, it takes a detour on your subject a little bit, because we're talking a lot about, obviously, gravity. That was the theme of the presentation. So these shouldn't stay upright, right? I mean, even the hardest bonding solution like cement or resin, even that, gravity, we would imagine, is a little bit stronger. So how do these actually work, right? Something to keep in mind. Now, it doesn't only have to be art. You can do music, right? You can hear the interpretations in different languages if you speak them. Okay, so again, the point is just going off. Sometimes we feel that to better understand the subject, we have to keep reading the same passage over and over. And the purpose of the presentation was to get you to ask questions so that you could, again, better understand. Okay, and it's easier on the brain as well instead of fixating on the passage intensely. So let's go over the 6 dimensions again really quickly in case anyone was writing these down. First, we said explain it, right? Explain it to anyone so that they can ask you questions. Second, we talked about the different perspectives and we saw the anti-gravity alliance that exists, right? And what they believe. So again, with your subject, don't think that there's not an opposing side. There probably is. We talked about your self-knowledge. We want you to tie this into you and your day-to-day life. We talked about empathizing with the subject as well. So tapping into our feelings can help us better understand the subject. We talked about this practical application, right, in the real world. So how do we apply this? And again, remember I said the algebra, I didn't like algebra. I never thought about how that would affect me long term. So that's something to keep in mind, and your artist's representation on this subject, whether that be paintings, dance, music, right? You'd be surprised all of the things you can find, the artistic representations on those subjects that you are learning and trying to deepen that understanding again. Something else that can help with comprehension is inspecting before you read. And we actually talk about this in our speed reading workshop, which, as I mentioned, is our #1 workshop, right? We've taught that in over 100 cities around the world. So definitely check that out. I'll just give you a quick little sneak peek at what we talk about in the workshop, which is inspecting. And when you inspect, it not only helps you with better comprehension, but it also helps you with better focus and attention as well. So as we inspect whatever it is we need to read, these are the things we want to look for. So the intro, headings and subheadings, words in bold and or italics, the titles of charts, tables, and diagrams, the conclusion, as well as any questions that may be published in the piece. So this is what we're looking at first before we actually read through the chapter, okay, or the report or the journal article or whatever it is we need to read, okay? We're going to try this together. We're going to inspect something. If you want to access that link again, irisreading.com/comp. We're going to flow.pdf. So this is what we're looking for, okay? We've got going with the flow. Let's inspect it together. Okay, so introductory quote says, life is a series of natural and spontaneous changes. Don't resist them. That only creates sorrow. Let reality be reality. Let things flow naturally forward in whatever way they like. Okay, so that was by Lao Tzu. Then we've got the first subheading, realize that you can't control everything. 2, become aware. 3, breathe. 4, get perspective. 5, practice. 6, laugh. And 7, realize that you can't control others. And at the bottom it says this passage is selected from a book, Focus, a Simplicity Manifesto in the Age of Distraction by Leo Babauta. We actually have the book, so if you'd like a free copy, we can send that to you, okay? So we're going to read through this. I'll give you 2 minutes to read through it. And again, that was just a quick inspection. Now let's finish reading the article, okay? So I will disable my webcam. We'll read for 2 minutes. Here we go. 3, 2, 1, go. All right, very good. So we read for 2 minutes again. Let's see, Terrence says, I'd like a free copy. Sure, I'll share my email. Just send me a quick email. Let me know that you were here, and I'll get that book to you immediately. So yeah, no problem. That's he's actually given us permission to share it. So if you'd like it, we can totally make that available to you. Go ahead and assess your comprehension the second time. So if you want to maybe think about if you understood the article, maybe we were able to tap into some of those dimensions that we talked about. So maybe your self-knowledge, how does this article affect you, right? Maybe we can empathize with Leo Babauta and think about what made him write this book, right? Maybe did he see someone that was struggling, or was he struggling, so he decided to write that book. Again, focus. Does feel like people have a hard time focusing nowadays, right? Maybe we can think about explaining this, right? And we thought maybe I can explain this to someone who maybe actually needs to hear this, right? Or they need a copy of this book as well. So again, just some questions. Again, you see how we're trying to tie in those dimensions so that you're not just fixating on trying to remember one sentence, but you're pulling, right, by means of questions, what you understood while reading this article. So if you made improvements, very good. I know a lot of you started with a very, very high comprehension percentage. So again, this can maybe just help sharpen the tools you already have in your comprehension toolbox. Again, inspecting helps by getting the gist of what we're reading first. Okay, so we want to do this whenever we read really anything. I know a lot of us, we learned in grade school to read from beginning to end, no questions, no nothing, right? And the thing is that can actually mess with our focus, right? It can mess with our attention. Some of us can't pay attention for that amount of time. Maybe we don't even know we're going to need a few things to help us pay attention, like a cup of coffee, for example, right? Or maybe, do we have enough time? Are we in a good environment to read this, or are we going to have to not read here and go somewhere quiet, right? It's all about the preparation. Let's see, 100% love the excerpt from the book. I was also able to connect to the passage we read earlier. The dimensions we went over definitely helped me bring everything together. Oh, thank you, Terrence. I'm happy that you enjoyed this. I really, really am. Again, please, like the video if you did enjoy it. Share us or share this presentation with maybe friends, colleagues, anybody you feel that maybe needs a little bit more help in this area of comprehending. We'll quickly share our IRIS method. Okay, so as we said, we are IRIS reading, and we do have a 4-step process to better reading and learning. So in that speed reading workshop, we talk about inspecting and reading. So we want you to inspect anything you need to read, and then decide if this is something you need to read or not. As we said, I'm just from personal experience, I am still a student, and my professor on Fridays, I should be getting an email any minute now, pretty much. He'll send them at 10 a.m. He will say, all right, over the weekend, these are a few things that you should look into for next week's, review. And a lot of times I found that they have nothing to do with our classwork or my subject, my major, anything like that. I think he thinks that we're just looking for things to read over the weekend when we have enough to read. So inspect first, then decide if you're going to read or not. We talked about asking questions, and we talked more importantly about answering these questions, okay? So after you read the passage, ask questions. Did you get it? What did you get from it? Okay, go through those 6 dimensions we talked about, and then we want you to move to the final step, which is storing. Either storing it in your memory or storing it on paper by means of your notes. Okay, but unfortunately, sometimes students will try to memorize something before understanding it, or before even reading through everything that needs to be read through. So this again is a 4-step process to better reading and better learning. It's a system in place. Sometimes we treat learning like we'll just go to class and wing it, and that will catch up with you eventually. So we don't want that to happen to anyone. We just want you guys to have a nice system in place when, again, in class and trying to learn. Again, if you'd like a copy of the book, for those of you interested, send me an email at cynthia@irisreading.com and I can get that to you immediately. Again, that's cynthia@irisreading.com. With that, we will we'll close out today's presentation. It was a pleasure having you in the audience. If you do enjoy, again, the content from today's video, please like and subscribe to this channel. Also, please check us out on social media. We would appreciate your support as well, as we are trying to make reading and learning fun again. So with that, have a good rest of your day. Feel free to reach out to my email or reach out to us by means of social media. It is connected to our phone, so we will see your message automatically. So any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out that way. Have a good rest of your day, everyone, and don't forget to check out our website, irisreading.com. See you soon.